Hey, Aggie fans, welcome back to Aggie Pride, a UC Davis football podcast where we bring you the stories, the insights, and the interviews from all corners of Aggie football. I'm Brock Galvin, and today we've got a big one. Joining us is none other than Sam Herder, FCS football analyst for Hero Sports, and one of the most plugged-in voices in the game. We talk the national contenders, conference realignment, portal trends, and of course, UC Davis football. Before we jump in, quick reminder, we now have count them, 5 subscriber-only episodes that are live. These include interviews with players and coaches and Aggie legends you won't hear anywhere else. So be sure to subscribe on Spotify for $5 a month. The link is in the bio. You can also follow the show on Spotify and Apple and YouTube so you never miss an episode, or follow our Instagram or Twitter for all the content and updates. We're trying to do more and more on social media. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to Aggie Pride, a UC Davis football podcast. It's Dwight Smith and Brock Galvin, and we're joined by, the FCS football guru. This guy's on like 17 shows a day. I don't know when he sleeps. None other than Sam Herder. Sam, thanks for being back on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be back on with you guys. I believe this is my second time coming on the podcast. Always great to talk with you guys, and I saw you guys last year in South Dakota as well. So great to meet up with you guys again. And yeah, looking forward to the show.
Yeah, that was
Painful
our last game.
memories. Yep.
That was our last game. So I feel like half the people we've had on in off season, it's like, last time I saw you was in South Dakota. Last time I saw you.
Okay.
It's okay. We're not bitter or still upset about it at all. I will say that we own some space in the Vermilion real estate because those dudes are tagging us on every post, and they're still basking in that, playoff win last year, which is kind of funny. Anyway, Sam, catch us up. Pretty sure you got married. I feel like we need to start there and say congratulations, dude. How's that married life treating you?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. It's been good. About a little more than a month now. So got married in late June here in Minnesota. Then took our honeymoon pretty quickly after in Hawaii. That was paradise. And during that time, of course, the last week of June is like when the craziest off the field stuff happens in college football. And so I don't know if that happened at a good time, just so I could not completely ignore it, but just kind of not stress out about it, or if it happened at a bad time because I was laying poolside, getting, poolside bar service while the college football landscape kind of went into pandemonium, and I was kind of sitting there, in Hawaii, like, I'll worry about it when I get back. So it was a good time there, and now back to reality and getting ready for the upcoming season.
Yeah, real quick
Congrats.
before Dwight gets us rolling, how's that, in your mindset looking into a season, like we often like just leave like kind of the personal side out of things. But the reality is like it's a different, type of role being in reporting like yourself and being someone who I would say is extremely active, like, just the shams of FCS football, just dropping all the latest, breaking news. And so, yeah, how do you kind of look forward to this season? And are there any things that you kind of reflect on and go like, okay, I think I'm going to do this a little bit differently strategically in terms of how I, perform as a journalist? Or for you, do you feel like you have a good system and kind of your A's, B's, and C's to getting things done?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was never really I kind of just stumbled into this, in a certain sense. I started freelancing for Hero Sports in 2016 while I was in the newspaper and magazine business, and then, just kind of consistently freelance for them. And then they offered me a full-time job in 2018, and I said sure, and I've been here, ever since. And I think one, the FCS media space isn't crowded at all, right? And so as long as you work hard and you report well and you do your research and you just show people that, hey, you somewhat know what you're talking about, and all that, like, you just kind of continuously build better sources and build more trust, whether it's with commissioners or coaches or ADs, or probably most importantly, the fans. And so it's kind of just been a steady growth for me over these years. Honestly, in like 2018 and 2019, I didn't really care about all the off the field stuff and reporting and I still don't necessarily like am out there chasing scoops. Like that's just exhausting to try to break news every single day. That's not really my MO. But it wasn't really until COVID is when all the off the field reporting is when I really started to really started to pick up on that and offer some reporting and break some news just because that was such an important time during COVID of like who's playing, who's not playing, what's going on, is there going to be a season? And then so ever since then, it also seems like the college football landscape just keeps on getting crazier. And so whether it's the transfer portal or the house settlement, realignment, I mean, those are not just as important, but they play a huge impact on what happens on the field. And so that just keeps me busy all year round. I mean, unfortunately, like it kind of seems every offseason I pay a little less attention to spring ball and a little less attention to the NFL draft just because there's so much other stuff, going on. And so you just try to cover things as best you can a year round and, see what works, see what doesn't work, and, kind of just keep on rolling.
Yeah, man, it's I don't know how you do it, but I'm appreciative that you do because I know I benefit from it and so many of our listeners do as well. For our time tonight, we have a game plan to start very broad and then funnel down, from the big picture to the big sky to UC Davis and then, some other kind of more miscellaneous questions we've got for you. And we want to get through it before the storm hits. So let's start biggest picture. I'm looking at the FCS as of July 28th, Monday, July 28th in the evening, because everything changes day to day, hour to hour when we're recording this. You came out with some, preseason kind of rankings and looking at that, but talk to us about top 5 contenders for a title. If you had to kind of, maybe it matches the list you release, but who's your top 5 and what would you say separates them from the rest of the field?
Yeah, it's interesting going into this year because I've started to see a little bit of conversation on FCS social media about, is this the year the FCS is wide open, the national title race? Like it looks as wide open as ever. And I do push back on that. And, I don't like pushing back on that because I've said pretty publicly, like it'd be great if someone in the South, Southeast, West Coast, East Coast, like rises up and wins an FCS national title. Like that'd be good for the FCS if someone outside of the Dakotas and the Montanas, like we're playing in Frisco, or we're playing in Nashville this year for the FCS national championship. But until that actually happens, where there is someone that breaks through and consistently competes at that top, I just go back to, I think it's going to be North Dakota State. I think it's going to be Montana State. I think it's going to be South Dakota State there at the end, whether it's semifinals, championship game. I think South Dakota, has earned the right to be in that tier as well. Before the spring portal window, I would have said South Dakota was the clear number 2. But since that spring portal window, they lost like 3 starting offensive linemen, their top tackler, top defensive back, one of their go-to wide receivers. So that bumped them back a little bit. So I order it North Dakota State 1, Montana State 2, South Dakota, and then South Dakota State 4. But then who's that 5th team? There's usually a team that kind of emerges and pushes that top tier. To me, that's UIW this year. I really like the core they have coming back, and they also brought in a really impressive transfer portal class, including multiple FCS guys who were, FCS all-conference players. And so I think UIW, if there's a team that can break through and challenge that top tier, UIW to me is that team. Now, is there a big separation between UIW and Illinois State, or UIW, UC Davis, UIW, Tarleton State? I don't think there's that big of a gap necessarily. I do have Illinois State 6 and UC Davis 7, Tarleton State 8. And so between 5 and 8, you can probably order those however you want. And then 1 through 4, really 2 through 4, you can probably order that however you want as well. I think NDSU deserves to be number 1. So that's kind of how I lay out my top 8 right there.
What do you see with your, like you said, the consistent top 2, 3, and 4 this year, other than just the systems they've built, the consistency they have? Are there any other nuggets you're picking up on as you look specifically to this coming season with that cream of the crop group that's solidifying your ranking?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, these programs, especially North Dakota State, Montana State, South Dakota State, they've shown the ability to reload. And so it's not necessarily blind faith, because when you do dive into those three rosters, they bring back a really nice core of players, especially NDSU. I think they're going to be super experienced in the secondary, should have a pretty strong defensive line, have a really good group of wide receivers. South Dakota State, I think maybe a misconception about South Dakota State, just generally speaking, is, oh, they got gutted by the transfer portal. But when you really dive into last year's team and this year's team, to be a good college football team, especially in the FCS, to make a deep playoff run, you need to have depth and you need to rotate a lot of players. And so, like South Dakota State, maybe they only return 2 starters on the defensive line, whatever it is, but they return like 5 guys who have played at least 200 snaps on the defensive line for South Dakota State. It's the same thing with Montana State. People might think, oh, Montana State's, offensive line, they lose everyone. Well, they bring back, like, due to injuries and rotating players on the offensive line due to their depth, they bring back, I want to say, 3 guys with full-time starting experience, and then they bring a 4th guy back as well that started a couple games at tackle last year. And so you really like the depth that they've built, and that's allowed them to be able to reload every year. I mean, even if NDSU says, I think NDSU has like 4 starters coming back on defense. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you look beyond the starts and the snaps, you go, okay, they actually bring back like a lot of guys who weren't quote unquote starters, but they had, a lot of depth pieces that are coming back. What's interesting about these teams is NDSU, Montana State, South Dakota State, UIW, and UC Davis, 5 of my top 7 teams, all have new starting quarterbacks. So that's kind of the variable in this whole thing, where NDSU is preseason number 1, but if they struggle at the quarterback position, that obviously knocks them back. South Dakota State, they're at number 4 right now for me. If Chase Mason, their assumed starting quarterback, if he plays like an All-American, all of a sudden they go from 4 to number 1. Same thing with UC Davis. I like the core of what UC Davis has coming back, especially offensively. If they get great quarterback play, that boosts them up. Obviously, if the quarterback play is kind of choppy, that drops them back down. So that is what is so interesting about this year, is so many of these top teams have a new starting quarterback.
This episode is sponsored by the Larison Real Estate Team, Bob and Jan Larison. You already know the name. They've been incredible supporters of UC Davis football, this podcast, and of course, they're Lance's parents, now cheering him on as he suits up for the New England Patriots. Off the field, Bob and Jan are one of the top real estate teams in the region, helping folks buy and sell across Idaho and Eastern Oregon. Whether it's a home, land, or investment property, they bring experience, hustle, and heart to every deal. So if you're looking to make a move or just want honest guidance, check out LarisonTeam.com or follow them on Instagram at Larison Real Estate. Huge thanks to Bob and Jan for backing Aggie Pride. So we had a couple fan-submitted questions, and Aggie Finn said, ask Sam what sticks out for him from all the transfer portal news. You've been touching on this. He says, obviously, SAC is grabbing players en masse on the star scale. Heard Montana grabbed a quarterback out of USC. And was it North Dakota State grabbing a 4-star running back from Wisconsin? What say you in more detail about what catches your eye with the transfer portal at the FCS level?
Yeah, it's, from January through April, it seems all we're talking about is all the players leaving. This is not just this year, but it's last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or during that time period, you just see this all-conference player leaving, this all-conference player leaving. And I'm sitting there going like, man, who's going to be left? Like, it's so hard to track all these guys leaving, but that's just all you're seeing on social media. It just seems like, the FCS gets gutted. But once the portal window ends and then you start getting into preview season in May, I have a big database of players, whether it's returning all conference players, returning players who were in the top 50 for PFF grades within their position, or top 50 as far as statistical leaders. We also look at all conference players 2 years ago. You double check that, just because there might be a 2023 all conference player who got hurt last year and he's coming back in 2025. You don't want to overlook him as well. And by the time that database is done, you kind of go through and you go, okay, I think the FCS is going to be fine. Like, every year there's probably 3 times as many standouts that stay than leave. Now, that doesn't mean the transfer portal doesn't hurt the FCS. Like, it really hurts the depth of the FCS for sure. But I think there are still more standout guys that decide to stay than leave. But, it's that high-end top-tier talent that is getting more and more difficult to hold on to. So there's definitely probably the negatives outweigh the positives, but there are definitely positives when it comes to the transfer portal in the FCS. I mean, UC Davis got what, 2 or 3 all conference level guys, from the FCS. There's a lot of FBS guys that come down to the FCS that make huge impacts as well. And then also with the transfer portal, one more thing to add is because the FBS is spending more scholarships on transfers than high school recruits, I've heard from several FCS coaches that the level of talent coming out of high school into the FCS has never been better than it is today. Now it's a challenge to hang on to those guys if they have a breakout sophomore year, but you're still getting the talent level in the FCS. I think continues to refill. Maybe that top end, high tier, day 1, day 2 NFL draft pick talent isn't here anymore, but I still think the overall depth of talent in the FCS is still pretty strong.
Yeah, it's interesting. The hot button issues are transfer portal and conference realignment. We definitely want to get your take on the latter as well. I think I'm saying that right. And before I give it back to Dwight to go into UC Davis centric questions, I do want to ask you your take. We had Zach McKinnell and Timothy Rosario over at the Blue Bloods recently, and they were getting their crystal ball out and predicting the future. What you have such an interesting perspective covering FCS for a good chunk of time now and being so connected with a lot of programs. And I just would ask you, like, how do you see the conference realignment or the FBS movement continuing to kind of reshape FCS? I know we asked it last year. What's new this year for you?
Yeah, conference realignment just never seems to end. And I mean, it could stay the same, as far as the FBS. I mean, now like UNC might go to the SEC, or there's rumors there. What's Florida State going to do? That could create a whole new, huge avalanche effect. But like right now, the FBS, if they wanted to, could stand pat because Conference USA, I think they're at 10 members. They don't necessarily need to add. The Mountain West doesn't necessarily need to add, and so theoretically, the conferences, as far as the FBS conferences, can just stand pat and say, you know what, enough with the realignment. Like, we're good where we're at. Let's just take it easy for the next few years. As we know, that's probably not going to happen. Like, some Sunbelt members might not be happy about Louisiana Tech joining, and so some Sunbelt members might want to go to the American, and then it just starts a snowball effect as well. Like, maybe the Mountain West wants to add a couple more members, in 2 years, just get their membership up. Where do they grab from there? Conference USA, just to feel more secure, maybe they want to add 2 more members from the FCS, and so it seems like it's never going to end. The most likely probably seems that Tarleton State will end up in Conference USA, at some points, geographically, resources wise, university wants. I think that makes sense for Conference USA to add Tarleton State. I know McNeese has been floated out there as well, which could be a possibility, but I think Tarleton is much more ready than McNeese. You have the Sacramento State kind of saga. Are they going to get into the FBS? Are they not? Right now, there's no pathway for them to get into the FBS unless, I know they hired Jeffrey Kessler, the attorney. Maybe they can sue their way, into the FBS, similar to Liberty, but right now their pathway is blocked. I know UC Davis football, as far as the Mountain West, they it's not a direct clear path. I think the official wording is, if the Mountain West is going to add an FCS opponent, UC Davis has the right to apply first, but that doesn't necessarily mean the Mountain West has to add UC Davis. With that said, with UC Davis already being a Mountain West member for its other sports, like that onboarding process, which not a lot of people talk about, like onboarding a team to join for football, it takes a lot of, background work. That makes it pretty easy to get UC Davis into the Mountain West for football because all their other sports are already in there. You're familiar with the president and the AD. And so I do think sometime down the road, UC Davis could wind up in the Mountain West. How we get there, when we get there, I don't know. Obviously, I think NDSU, there's kind of a misconception that NDSU is comfortable in the FCS and they don't want to jump up to the FBS. I think that's definitely false. I think NDSU certainly wants to go to the FBS. They've looked into it. They've had conversations. You can maybe argue that NDSU should be even more aggressive in trying to jump to the FBS, but I definitely think there's a want there for the Bison to go to the FBS. They just need that right invite, and right now being located in Fargo, North Dakota, the Conference USA just doesn't really make sense. The MAC hasn't shown much interest. NDSU would love to join the Mountain West or the American, but they haven't extended invites just yet. And obviously, the Sun Belt doesn't work either for NDSU. So those are just some teams that come to mind as far as potentially making that jump to the FBS.
I'm going to ask you real quick. Sorry, Dwight. I'm interested. Remember that stretch where North Dakota State beat like Kansas State and I don't know, Minnesota or something like that. It was like a few different, seasons. maybe a break in between that. It just, you watch the games, and I would always be pumped to watch it, even as a totally, don't have much connection. I'm like, yep, this is going to be a good game. They're probably going to win, or they're going to look like they're better than this team, even if they lose. And so, I think of Montana State last year, early in the year, just dominating in a lot of ways against their FBS opponent, New Mexico. But what do you think about like North Dakota State? Has there ever been conversations like about the Big 12 when that was a thing, or did that just feel like way too much shooting for the stars? But when you look at who the Big 12 ended up adding, obviously big name programs, but was that ever a conversation in your spheres?
I don't believe so. I don't think that FCS to Power 5, Power 4 jump is ever going to happen, just because some of it is resources and some of it is just public perception. But I mean, even the Mountain West, they were looking at Louisiana Tech, and before they were ever looking at NDSU or the Montana schools or UC Davis, just because there is that public perception of adding FCS teams. So I don't think the Big 12 was ever looking at NDSU, just because if they were ever going to add, they would probably look at the G5 powers. There's rumors that the MAC reached out to NDSU in like 2013. There's no way to verify that, because no one would confirm, and it could just be rumors. I believe Conference USA and NDSU had a little bit of conversation back in 2021, but nothing came of that. Conference USA obviously kind of stuck in the southeast, southern corner, during that time, and so there just really hasn't been a whole lot of movement there as far as NDSU getting conference invites from the FBS.
Well, Louisiana Tech makes a lot of sense, for the Mountain West. A lot of mountains. At some point in this country's history, Louisiana was, west. There was a big purchase that happened, but it's just ridiculous, like all the different ways people are trying to put the puzzle together. And yeah, it's tough to ask you to read the crystal ball. But as it stands today, we still have the Big Sky as we know it. So I want to shift us a little bit to Big Sky and then UC Davis. So first, Big Sky, as you look at the Big Sky right now, what's your read on the race this year? Who's trending up and who's maybe trending down or trending question mark, and then shifting from there to Davis, your perspective kind of from the outside, what is it really gonna take? Like what would you say is the ceiling for Davis this year? And for that to happen, what needs to click?
Yeah, I think for Davis, obviously, and we touched on this earlier about just the quarterback position. That's kind of the X factor for so many of these top teams, and really can vary where you're at in the rankings is based off of your quarterback play. And I think with Davis, I mean, I tweeted this out too. I mean, you look at the quarterback competition, and then there's several 3-star quarterbacks in that quarterback room. A lot of them are either redshirt freshmen or true freshmen, and so the true freshmen are probably going to redshirt and all that. I believe I saw one of the redshirt freshmen is potentially the favorite to win that starting job. But I think if you get good quarterback play, and I also tweeted this too, like the combination of the talent in that room, and then just the creative that offense is led by coach, and just it always seems like they're going to get good quarterback play. And I hate to call it like a system quarterback, because I think that has a negative connotation. But when you play in a system like Davis, they're going to find a way, play calling wise, to get that quarterback in a groove. And so you kind of, again, blind faith in a way. Like you trust that UC Davis is going to get at least good quarterback play. And if it gets great quarterback play, obviously that takes the offense to another level, because what is it, either 4 or 5 returning starters on the offensive line, or at least 5 guys with pretty solid starting experience. I mean, in the transfer portal era where offensive linemen are coveted, like that's very rare to have. I think like Villanova is another team that has 4 or 5 starters coming back on the offensive line, but a lot of other people have like 2 or 3 guys on the offensive line. And so you always feel good there in the trenches for Davis. Defensively, a lot of holes to fill there, but I like some of the transfers that Davis brought in that are going to be immediate impact guys, FCS all-conference level players. Obviously, the Connors brothers, they're going to be fantastic preseason All-Americans. So I think for UC Davis, the talent is probably there, just showing that ability to reload year after year. And, a lot of coaches say we don't want to flinch on graduation day because everyone's going to lose great senior classes and talented guys. How do you replace them? And I think for Davis, it probably starts in the trenches, because you're going to have to go through Montana State in the Big Sky and potentially in the playoffs. You're going to have to go through the Dakotas, in the playoffs if you want to get to where you want to go. And in those games, most of the time it comes down to to the trenches and who can win that battle in the third and fourth quarters. And so just continually getting better in the trenches, getting deeper on the defensive line, allotting more scholarships to the defensive line. That's one thing South Dakota State did when they took their jump from the mid 2010s into the later 2010s was they decided we need to get deeper on the defensive line. And so we're going to, instead of putting X amount of scholarship money toward the defensive line, let's increase that by 30% or 40%, whatever the case may be. So kind of small things like that is how you can build out your roster to really compete at a national level.
Yeah, I think, that's, in hearing Coach Plow talk, our sense is that is the strategy. And even going back to what you shared about kind of the transfer portal area and looking to obviously get quality, as you wrote, quality over quantity from the portal, but also think about the riches at the high school level now that folks are focusing more on the portal and looking to really bring folks in, bring that continuity and kind of have the pitch of like, come here, develop, have an amazing 2, 3, 4 years, and then, if you want to take your talent somewhere else, more power to you. Looking at the Big Sky, there's been a lot that's happened in the off season. I'm even looking back to last year, you had NAU make that kind of push near the end of the season, and then in the off season, Idaho kind of with the coaching change, and so there's obviously a lot of talent. It's always any given Saturday type league, but what are you seeing as you look ahead and see the Big Sky race? Who are the leaders in your mind, and who are the bigger question marks?
Yeah, my top two in the conference would be Montana State and then UC Davis, and that reflects too on my top 8 that I broke down a little earlier. Montana State, another team that has the question mark at quarterback, but I think the Cats will be loaded at running back. Offensive line, they lose 2 of their better offensive linemen, but due to rotations and injuries, they bring back like three and a half, if you want to call it a half, returning starters on the offensive line. I think their defensive line has a chance to be one of the better ones in the FCS. And so despite that unknown at quarterback and replacing a legend in Tommy Lott, I still like Montana State as that top team. But like I said, I do have Davis at that number 2 spot, in the Big Sky, and we kind of broke them down already. After that, I like the Grizz. They have a lot more just personnel question marks than the top 2 teams in Montana State and UC Davis. But, part of it is the schedule as well. The Grizz get a lot of home games this year, especially against some of their top opponents. And so that helps when you're just kind of penciling out what their record could be. After that, Sac State is super intriguing to me. I mean, they could be the best team in the FCS, or they could finish 5-7 this year. You just don't know how that talent gels. I mean, they have 3, 4, or 5 4-star recruits who redshirted last year at their Power 4 programs, and they're redshirt freshmen this year. Like, maybe they'll be really good, maybe they're not. Like, we've seen a 5-star quarterback at Cal Poly, in recent years, and he was okay, but like just because you're a highly ranked guy, doesn't mean you're going to be a star at the FCS level. So Sac State is intriguing to me. I like Northern Arizona. I really liked what they did last year under their first year head coach and Coach Wright. They bring back a nice core of guys. I recently did their team preview, and they bring back more players than what I originally thought. So I like them as well. Idaho will be interesting. I think they have a good base to build off of, some decent experience on the offensive line. I think their front 7 should be pretty good. But I mean, even last year at this time when Jason Eck was still the coach, they were still going through a pretty high roster turnover just with the transfer portal. And they obviously got hit pretty hard this year as well. So I still think Idaho is on solid footing. With some of the players they lost, new head coach, although I think Thomas Ford is going to be a good head coach, maybe they take a slight step back compared to back-to-back quarterfinal appearances, but I still think they'll at least be in the chase for a playoff spot.
Okay, a couple off-script questions, because as you're chatting, it just got me thinking. These are just like rapid-fire either-ors. Did the best team win the 2024-2025 FCS National Championship in your eyes?
I'm sure this will get clipped, but I still think Montana State was the best team last year. I think at their best was better than NDSU at their best. That's obviously not how football works, and Montana State had an atrocious first half, and then NDSU got the stops they needed at the end of the day in the second half, and had some game clinching drives at the end of the game to win that one. So it's at the end of the day, NDSU obviously won that, and they deserved to win it, and they played better for enough of that time to win it. But I still thought Montana State at their best was the best team last year. But all that matters is who plays the best on that day, in January, and that was
for sure. Another one comes to mind, so I'm going to keep it rolling. There's a De La Salle High School in Minnesota. I know they're decent at football. There's a De La Salle High School down here in the Bay Area that, had a 151 game winning streak. We chat about them a lot because I was going to games growing up, and, they made the movie, Jim Caviezel's being Coach Ladd, so on and so forth. Don't know how familiar you are with them. It was always a mystique that they could not even be potentially at their A game, but I've always felt like the other team, just because of the history, had a hard time getting over the hump. Do you feel like it's similar with North Dakota State at the FCS level?
I think that's fair. It's not something where like Montana State was like intimidated or anything, like that, but they did seem like, I don't even know if timid is the right word, but in that game, it felt like Montana State was playing so tight because they were the favorites, and they had that, atrocious first half, first 1.5 quarters, and there is just something about NDSU, and I've written about this plenty of times when it comes to, the semifinals and the championship game, where even when on paper the other team has advantages here, statistically or just X's and O's wise, there's just something you can't account for, and that's NDSU just always seems to make those winning plays when it matters most, whether it's jumping on a fumble or getting a hand on the ball, or the other team just drops a third down conversion when they had all the momentum, and then NDSU gets the ball back, goes down and scores, and now it's a 14-point game. Like, NDSU just always wins in those margins, in those tight games, and I don't know how you can put your finger on that, why that is with NDSU, but there is maybe that mystique of it's just, in the water there. Even if it's a new player, they just rise up. I remember last year, real quick, like NDSU's safeties, this might get clipped again. NDSU's safeties last year weren't, frankly, they were okay. I'm not going to say they were bad, but they were okay. They really struggled to tackle in space. But against South Dakota State and Montana State in those final 2 games, those safeties played the games of their lives. The open field tackles they were making, I'm like, where is this coming from? So again, that just goes to show, like, whatever it is deep in the playoffs, like the plays they weren't making during the season, all of a sudden they were making, in the biggest moments. And I don't know what it is, how that works, but it just seems to work for NDSU.
Yeah. Okay, last one. I'll throw it to Dwight. Rapid fire. Stronger conference the last 3 years, Big Sky or Missouri Valley?
I think in the last 3 years, as far as stronger top to bottom, I'd go the Big Sky, just with depth and overall depth of the conferences. I think that might flip this year because I do like the depth of the Missouri Valley Football Conference. But I always go back to, what would you rather have? Would you rather have your top 6 teams being better than this team's top 6 teams? Or would you rather have 3 national title contenders compared to 2 national title contenders? And I think with the Valley, they have more contenders that can make, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and beyond than the Big Sky. But the Big Sky's depth, I think is better. But at the end of the day, like, does it matter if your 6th place team is better than that 6th place team, or your 10th place team is better than that 10th place team? Like, I would still rather be in the Valley shoes, where they have NDSU, South Dakota State, now South Dakota, compared to the Big Sky, where they've had Montana State consistently. Montana made the run a couple of years ago, but after that, like, Davis and Idaho made quarterfinal runs, but they, were still a step back from being in that national title picture. So it's kind of riding the fence a little bit with that answer.
As a true professional should and can.
Yep.
So shifting now from team focus and conference focus to players. We talked a little bit about Davis and who's not coming back, who is coming back, and looking at the season ahead, I want to see if there's anyone that you're tracking on for, those postseason watch lists that has the potential to really make waves with their individual contributions this year. And then just extending that to the FCS in general. Guys that, maybe popped towards the end of last year or who had a breakout year last year, who you're, expecting big things from this year. And I'm sure your list is many pages long. So just pick the top few.
Yeah, I think for UC Davis, the one that comes to mind, obviously is Rex Connors, multi-time first team all conference player. He's the type of player where, it depends on what voters want to vote on when it comes to the Buck Buchanan Award. Rex is a guy who he's going to have a lot of tackles, but he's also going to have some TFLs. He's going to have some pass breakups. He might, grab 3, 4, 5 interceptions. And so he's really going to fill out the stat sheet in a multitude of ways. And, you might rather have a guy that has 80 tackles, 10 TFLs, 4 interceptions, 8 pass breakups over a guy that has, 120 tackles, but, no TFLs. I really like offensively. I like Winston Williams. I don't know how a tight end could win a Walter Payton Award, unless you're Dallas Goedert and you have 70 catches for 1,000 yards, whatever he had, a decade ago. But, I think he's one of the better offensive players, offensive weapons in the FCS. But again, at the tight end position, are you going to have those raw stats that, jump off the page? I don't know, but I still like him. I think I had him top 2 or 3 returning FCS tight ends. I believe Dartmouth's tight end, Chris Corbor, was number 1 for me. He's really good as well in a pro prospect. But, nationally, Bryce Lance jumps off the page, North Dakota State wide receiver. He's probably the top NFL draft prospect going into next year, potentially a top 50 to 100 draft pick. So he jumps off the page. But, at the quarterback spot, Derek Robertson from Monmouth, he's going to light it up. Put up really big numbers, and it kind of seems like this has been a quarterback award in recent years. Sam Vidlak as well. He played in the Big Sky a couple of years ago. He's now at SFA. I really like him. Running back I think is pretty loaded. In the Big Sky, you have Gilman, you have Jones, Jamar Curtis. I really like him. He's a Lafayette transfer that's now at Sac State. Charles Pierre Jr. Is a really good running back from South Dakota. A breakout player, I like David Abbott from Villanova. He was just a freshman last year, so maybe that's why he's under the radar. But I think he was a freshman All-American last year, so I don't know. Technically, you could consider him a breakout player or not, but I think he could maybe become an even more household name this year with a really strong sophomore season.
Yeah, on the Winston Williams piece, I think a guy I'm going to be looking for to maybe feast off of the attention that Winston gets is Ian Simpson, who is an incredible athlete, but had a lot of injury last year. And so we caught some glimpses. So, I think it's going to be a tough pick to see who you're going to shift over depending on coverage. If you've got double tight, you've got Winston Williams and Ian Simpson in there, but it's exciting all around. I think there's a lot of guys. It's just an exciting time of year, especially thinking about fall camp, Brock, and thinking back to, the possibilities. Whatever team you're on, whatever your season was the year before, fall camp is also just a dynamic time where there's opportunity. Even if something was locked in coming out of spring, there's so much opportunity. And then you've also got the injury factor in fall camp, unfortunately, as well. So it's just going to be interesting to see how Davis comes out of fall and how all these teams, and show up on game 1, or in our case, week 0.
Week 0. Sam, you going to be there week 0 in Montgomery?
No, I won't be there. I'll probably just watch all those games from home. I am looking forward to that matchup. Obviously, 2 quarterfinal games, or 2 quarterfinal teams from last year, so that should be a headline game for sure. I've been pretty vocal about week 0, that FCS kickoff. I don't like that it's at a neutral site game, or a neutral site. Mercer has a pretty nice
very
stadium.
Neutral. It's a very neutral site.
Yeah, neutral, but not super neutral. But I know they have a sponsor for it, but I think they should just play it at a home stadium. Mercer's football stadium isn't very
Beautiful.
big, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's very nice. For its size, they fill it out pretty well. It just adds so much to the atmosphere to be able to play it at a home field. And since they moved it to Montgomery, it doesn't look good on TV. There's not much of an atmosphere there. Back in the day, they had week 0 games at Eastern Washington, Montana, NDSU, and now with this neutral site game, it just doesn't pop. But
Put me on
it'll
my
still be a fun game, but just
yeah.
atmosphere wise, I think it's gonna be lacking.
MLS soapbox for a second here. Dwight and I were college roommates, and I started getting into MLS because I'm a dork and I get into like niche things, which some could say FCS is niche. So niche, whatever. Point is, MLS Cup was historically a neutral venue played game. And after like 15 years of MLS, they decided we're going to play it in the higher seeds home stadium. And it became this banger atmosphere. And I think it really helped the image of the league, which is now like a top 10 league in the world. I'm off of my MLS soapbox now. And I'm going back to Dwight's comments on fall camp. And a fun one for you is like, if there was a Hard Knocks fall camp FCS documentary series, which I'm dabbling in the documentary world. I like it. Everyone loves a good documentary these days. Who do you think would make for, I don't know, the best drama, the best story at the FCS level?
Ooh, probably. I think for this offseason, you got to go with Sacramento State. Just with the new coaching staff, the transfers coming in, what the campus is like as far as the president and ads and athletic administration staff meetings. And I think that is, I think, probably easily the number one choice. But I think there'd be some other interesting ones as well. Like, I think UIW would be entertaining just because they have a fun young head coach who lets his players, and their personalities shine. So I think that would be a fun one as well. Like, obviously, like NDSU, like just to see how they go about their day-to-day business, I think would be interesting. And the Bison still have the top brand in the FCS. So if you're talking about like what would get the best ratings, I think NDSU would be fun. Jackson State, I think, would be fun. Probably more fun a few years ago when Deion Sanders was there, but I still really like what Jackson State is doing, and they have a great fan base and just environment as well. I know that's not technically what goes into these sort of documentaries, but Jackson State, I think, would be pretty popular as well. But yeah, I think that number one slot would have to be Sacramento State, especially this offseason.
Yeah, the go-go is hella entertaining, and we are, kind of biting our tongue as you say that, trying not to give them too much love, right, Dwight? But I would watch it.
You teed that up. You teed that up.
Yeah, I'd freaking watch it too. Dwight, what do you say? Last couple ones, wildest FCS environment or game you've ever covered, and then you take the playoff one. So I'll ask you, Sam, FCS environment that you've been in or game that you've covered that was just the like wildest, most rabid, the one that kind of sticks out above the pack for you?
Yeah, I think the Peak Fargo Dome is definitely the loudest and wildest environment I've been in. When I say Peak Fargo Dome, that's like 2011 to 2015, maybe even to 2016. Since then, this is a whole different podcast, but the level of enthusiasm in Fargo, even for playoff games, has kind of taken a dip down. They're not selling as much tickets as well. But, during that period, early 2010s, the Fargo Dome was just madness. There's a lot of games to kind of talk about, but one that probably sticks out is the semifinal game in 2012 versus Georgia Southern. Crazy game. NDSU won by like 3-4 points. Ran in a touchdown with a couple minutes left, but I just remember trying to talk to the person next to me in the press box and like screaming at the top of my lungs to try to like tell him something, whatever it was, something I was seeing or like what we're going to write about, something like that. It was a coworker, but like he couldn't even hear me and we're in the press box. And so imagine being down on the field, like yelling at the top of your lungs from inches away and you can't even hear. And so that's always kind of my like comparison point when someone asks what's the loudest environment you've been to, because I've been to Montana State, I've been to Montana. You guys were in Vermilion, even though it wasn't close to a sellout, it still got pretty loud in there. But I always referred back to like, if I can talk to the person next to me in the press box, then it's not as loud as that one game at the Fargo Dome. So yeah, definitely that's the one that tops the list.
We got to get you out to UC Davis Health Stadium, man. We got work to do, Brock. But we talk about it on the pod. Getting the game day and knock on wood, many more playoff atmosphere opportunities to be so loud that you can't hear the person next to you. Now we don't have it. We don't have the dome to help us with that, Sam, but we got work to do. We got to get you out west. But talking about playoffs, we saw you in Vermilion. I have a feeling your list here, it's going to be hard to pick just one thing. The FCS playoff system, it is what it is. If you could change one thing, a format, or part of the system, a feature of it, a rule related to current FCS playoffs system, what would that be?
Yeah, the one that topped my list we actually got last year, and that was seeding more teams, just to make it less of a regional bracket. And we got that last year with seeding 16 teams, and that'll continue on. So that was the number one thing that thankfully we got, fixed. So it wasn't just, such a regional bracket. Another thing maybe that would fix, but I don't know how exactly you would go about doing it. Would be not playing Thanksgiving weekend. But if you push everything ahead one week, so you take Thanksgiving off, maybe everyone gets to buy, then maybe the semifinals are going up against Christmas weekend. But I just wonder if there is a way in the calendar to shift off of Thanksgiving, because the crowds aren't great, for Thanksgiving, even worse than some of the other rounds, and it's always just kind of I like them because they're usually entertaining games, but it is kind of a lackluster environment. So that is one change I would make, is trying to get off of Thanksgiving weekend. But some other off the wall ones, like I think it'd be sweet to like rotate the title game every 2 years. Like 2 years they played in Nashville, and then the next 2 years they go back to Frisco, and then the 2 years after that they go to Tampa, and then 2 years after that, they go somewhere else. I think that would be fun, just because Frisco was always a blast, but it's kind of, when it's the same fan bases there every year, sometimes it does lose that luster, and so changing that environment, I think it is a positive. I understand why the NCAA kind of wants to lock things in for more than 2 years, just because it's easier, on their end. But I think rotating that would be sweet. Another one too, like I know a lot of people say like 24 teams is too much, just move it to 16. The problem with that though is like the auto bids aren't going away. Like that's not how NCAA tournament works. Every conference gets an auto bid, that wants one at least. And so I would rather have a 24 team bracket with what's now going to be 13 at large bids, rather than a 16 team bracket with only 5 at large bids. Because then if you do that, then the third place Big Sky team might not get in if we move it down to 16. And so, like if I had a magic wand, I would just say 16 team bracket, no auto bids, just see the top 16 teams and put them in the playoffs. That is obviously 0% chance of ever happening, because that's not how the NCAA operates. You can't get rid of auto bids. That's not how it works. But like if there was one thing I would do, I would just get rid of those auto bids and see the top 16 teams in the country and call it good.
Might have froze up on this. Yeah, I think the whole way the financial system is set up is a little bit wonky too. I don't have a perfect solution for it, but it's just I don't know. It makes it a little squirrely in my view.
That's a good point too. Like other stuff too would be like get rid of the ticket revenue split. Like I think 85% of your ticket revenue has to go to the NCAA, because technically it's not a UC Davis event. If you guys host a game, it's an NCAA tournament event, so they get 85% of the gate. There's still a bid process in there as well, but some of these things aren't just exclusive to the FCS. Like I think like baseball, like if whenever there's an NCAA postseason event on a campus, usually there's some sort of bid process with that, and so it's not just an FCS unique thing. But that's a good point as far as fixing the financials and somehow making it more financially rewarding to win games, in the FCS playoffs. I think would be a positive boost, and just getting rid of the bid amount and also not taking as much money from the gate would make it more financially rewarding to host a quarterfinal game and a semifinal game.
This is probably a good spot to wind it down. I know you're burning the evening candles for us, so we appreciate it. Where can our Aggie Pride podcast listeners follow your coverage, Sam, as we move through fall camp and preseason and into the start of this new season, and how can they support the work you're doing for FCS fans?
Yeah, our website is herosports.com. And so this, we've got team previews and some conference previews coming up, and, player rankings and that sort of good things. And then I'm on Twitter at Sam Herder FCS, pretty active on there, usually pretty exclusive, just FCS, content on my Twitter account. I don't tweet too much, random, BS out there, anymore. I usually just stick to mostly FCS stuff, but especially on game days, on Saturdays during the upcoming season, if you just want to feel for what's going on, scores and different results, I'm usually, got 6 to 8 games going on for 12 hours on Saturdays, and it's still hard to really keep track of all the stuff that's going on. Like, I'll tweet like, oh, this team is beating the number 5 team in the country right now. Then I'll get a response of like, well, what about us? We're beating the number 14 team by 10 points at halftime. And I'm getting there, all right. I can only watch so many games, at once. But on Saturdays is, if you want to check my Twitter account, hopefully that's a pretty good way to just keep track of everything that's going on in the FCS world.
Well, that famous line, with great power comes great responsibility. Mr. Sam Herder has the power, and he has the responsibility to get the info out to all of us, and you do a pretty great job of it. So we really appreciate the time, appreciate you coming on. Again, congratulations, man, on the recent huge life step. Wishing you and your bride all the best, and can't wait to have you back on, and hopefully get to see you at some point in person during this season, and hopefully in the postseason with the Ags.
Yeah, absolutely. As always, appreciate you guys having me on, and whenever you want to chit chat again, during the upcoming football season, I'm more than glad to come on the show.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Aggie Pride, a UC Davis football podcast with Sam Herder. If you enjoyed it, pass it along to a fellow Aggie and help us spread the word. Don't forget, we've got 5 exclusive subscriber-only episodes available now, so go check them out for $5 a month. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube to follow the show as well. And then our Instagram and Twitter, very active. And then lastly, if you're a business owner, we're trying to fill a couple more sponsor spots for the season. So if you know someone who might want to become a sponsor, reach out. We'd love to connect. You can email us at aggiepridepodcast@gmail.com. We've got a ton of great content coming your way, a bunch of episodes in the vault and recorded already. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. And as always, go Ags.